The Velkari were a proud species who believed in one thing above all else: perfection. Their empire stretched across 100 star systems, and their people lived by a code that was as old as their civilization itself. Every child born into the Dominion was tested, measured, and judged from the moment they took their first breath. Those who met the genetic standards were celebrated and raised with honor. Those who did not were cast aside like broken tools. Forgotten and abandoned without mercy. Princess Aleth Version came into the world on a night when 3 moons hung over the royal palace. Her mother, the High Queen, had waited years for this moment. The royal bloodline needed an heir, and all of the Dominion watched with hope as the tiny princess was presented to the Council of Elders. At first, everything seemed perfect. Aleth had the silver skin of royalty and the delicate features of her mother, but then the palace lights dimmed for the traditional marking ceremony, and the truth became clear. All Velkari possessed bioluminescent markings on their skin that glowed in the darkness. These markings were a sign of health, of strength, of genetic purity. A royal child's markings should burn bright and steady like eternal flames, but little Elith's markings flickered. They pulsed and stuttered like a dying star, bright one moment and dim the next. The Council of Elders gasped in horror, and the High Matriarch rose from her throne with cold fury in her eyes. "This child is flawed," she declared, her voice echoing through the silent chamber. The queen begged and pleaded for her daughter's life, but the law was clear: an absolute no defective child could sit upon the throne of the Velkarino. Imperfect heir could carry the royal bloodline forward. The High Matriarch showed no emotion as she gave her final judgment: she will be discarded. They did not kill Aleth, for that would waste genetic material that might still prove useful for study. Instead, they stripped her of her name, her title, and her place in the royal family. At just 3 years old, the princess became nothing more than a number. Discard 1137, a transport ship carried her to the edge of known space, to a forgotten mining moon called Calyx-7. This was where the Velkari sent all of their unwanted children, their criminals, their debtors, and their genetic failures. It was a place of gray rock and poisonous air, where the weak died quickly and the strong survived only to suffer when the transport doors opened and the guards pushed little Aleth out onto the cold stone. She did not understand what was happening. She called out for her mother, but no one answered. She reached for the guards, but they turned away without looking back. The ship lifted off and vanished into the stars, leaving her alone in a world that had already forgotten she existed. The other inhabitants of Calyx 7 were not kind to the new arrival. They were Velkari who had been discarded for their own flaws, and they had learned to hate everything about the society that rejected them. But they had also learned the same cruel lessons that society taught. The weak deserved their suffering, and compassion was a luxury no one could afford. Young Aleth learned to hide in ventilation shafts where the adults could not reach her. She learned to scavenge food from garbage piles and to sleep with one eye open. She learned that her flickering markings made her a target, so she covered her skin with rags and dirt to hide the glow. By the time she was 10, she had forgotten her real name entirely. She answered only to her number, and she thought of herself as nothing more than that. Discard 1137 was not a person. She was merely a thing that had somehow continued to exist. The mining work was brutal and dangerous. Children were sent into the smallest tunnels where adults could not fit, crawling through darkness to chip away at ore deposits with bleeding hands. Many of them died in cave-ins or from breathing the toxic dust. Aleth survived because she was quick and careful, but she carried scars on her body from every close call. The years passed slowly on Calyx 7, each one harder than the last. Aleth grew from a frightened child into a hardened young woman who trusted no one and expected nothing. Her bioluminescent markings once bright enough to shame the royal court, had faded to almost nothing. The doctors on the station said it was malnutrition. But Aleph knew the truth. Her light was dying because her hope had died long ago. She was 18 years old when the Dominion finally decided that Calyx 7 had nothing left to offer. The mines were exhausted, and the cost of maintaining the outpost was no longer worth the profit. A message arrived announcing that all personnel would be evacuated within one standard week. But when the ships came, they did not come for everyone. The guards and administrators boarded first, taking the healthy workers who could still provide value elsewhere. The rest were left behind, deemed too old or too sick or too damaged to be worth saving. Jelith was working in the deepest tunnels when the evacuation began, and no one bothered to tell her. She only learned what was happening when the ground began to shake and the supports started to collapse. The Dominion was not just abandoning the station. They were destroying it to hide the evidence of what had happened there. Aleph ran through the crumbling tunnels with dust filling her lungs and rocks falling all around her. She almost made it to the surface, but a massive beam collapsed and pinned her legs to the ground. She screamed for help, but there was no one left to hear her. The pain was beyond anything she had ever known, and she felt her consciousness beginning to fade in that moment, trapped and broken and utterly alone. Aleph finally accepted what she had always believed: she was worthless, and she would die as she had lived, forgotten and unmourned. The darkness closed in around her, and she stopped fighting. But somewhere far above, a ship was approaching the dying moon. It was not a Valkyrie vessel. It was something else entirely, and aboard that ship, a human captain was about to make a decision that would change the fate of an empire. Captain Marcus Cole had seen many strange things in his 40 years of life, but he had never grown tired of the stars. His ship, the Second Chance, was an old salvage vessel held together by spare parts and stubborn determination. The crew was small but loyal, and they made their living by picking through the wreckage that other species left behind. When the distress beacon from Calyx 7 reached them, Marcus almost ignored it. Valkyrie territory was dangerous for humans, and abandoned mining stations rarely held anything worth the risk. But something in the signal caught his attention. A faint life sign buried deep within the collapsing structure. Could be survivors, his first mate Sarah said, studying the scanner with tired eyes. Could be a trap, replied Victor, the ship's engineer, who never trusted anything that seemed too easy. Marcus thought about it for a long moment, then made his decision. We go in, he said. And that was the end of the discussion. The Second Chance landed on Calyx 7. Just as the last of the station's power systems failed, the air was thin and filled with dust, and the ground trembled with aftershocks from the controlled demolitions. Marcus led a small team into the tunnels. Following the faint life sign on his scanner, they moved quickly through the darkness, climbing over rubble and squeezing through gaps that threatened to collapse at any moment. After nearly an hour of searching, they found her as she was pinned beneath a massive beam, covered in blood and dust and barely breathing. Her silver skin marked her as Valkyrie, but she was thinner than any Valkyrie Marcus had ever seen. Her bones pressed against her flesh, and her eyes were closed in what looked like final surrender. Found one, Marcus called into his communicator. Already moving to assess the situation, Victor arrived with cutting tools, and together they began working to free her legs. The young woman woke as they worked, and her reaction was immediate and violent. She screamed and clawed at them with broken fingernails, certain that they had come to finish what the collapse had started. Her flickering markings blazed with fear as she fought against the very people trying to save her. Easy, easy, Marcus said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. We are not here to hurt you. We are here to help. She did not understand. Her eyes were wild with terror and years of learned distrust. So Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He took off his jacket, the warm one lined with synthetic fur that he had owned for 20 years, and he wrapped it gently around her shivering shoulders. It was such a simple gesture, but it stopped her cold. No one had ever given her something without wanting something in return. No one had ever touched her with gentleness instead of violence. She stared at him like he was speaking a language she had never heard. "My name is Marcus," he said slowly, meeting her eyes with steady calm. "What is your name?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She could not remember, and the shame of that forgetting burned in her chest. "I am Discard 1137, she finally whispered, because that was the only identity she had left. Marcus felt his heart break a little at those words. "That is not a name," he said firmly. "That is what someone called you when they wanted to make you feel like nothing. But you are not nothing. You are a person." They freed her from the rubble and carried her back to the ship. The medical officer, a cheerful woman named Dr. Chung, immediately began treating her injuries. She had 2 broken legs, 3 cracked ribs, and more cuts and bruises than anyone could count. But the physical damage was nothing compared to what 15 years of abandonment had done to her spirit. When Alice woke in the medical bay, she was convinced it was all a dream or perhaps a trick. Surely these strange, soft-skinned aliens would reveal their true intentions soon. Surely they would demand payment or service or something in return for saving her life, but the demands never came. Instead, Dr. Chun asked her what she wanted to eat, and the question was so foreign that Alice did not know how to answer. She had never been asked what she wanted. She had only ever been told what she would receive. Sarah brought her clothes that were clean and warm and fit her properly. Victor fixed a small music player and left it by her bed so she would have something to listen to while she healed. And Marcus came every day to sit with her and talk, never pushing, never demanding, just being present. "Why are you doing this?" Alice finally asked one evening, her voice rough from years of disuse. Marcus looked at her with genuine confusion. "Doing what?" "Helping me," she said, gesturing at the comfortable bed and the healing wounds and all the kindness she could not understand. "I have nothing to give you. I am worthless. I am discarded. Why would you waste resources on someone like me?" The captain was quiet for a long time, and Alice braced herself for the answer she expected. But when Marcus finally spoke, his words shattered everything she thought she knew about the universe. "You are a person," he said simply. "That is enough. That is all the reason anyone should ever need." Alice did not cry. She had forgotten how, but something deep inside her cracked open, and a tiny seed of light began to grow in the darkness of her heart. Over the following weeks, she learned that the humans called their way of thinking compassion. They believed that every person had value simply because they existed, not because of what they could do or what they could offer. It was the most alien concept Alice had ever encountered, more strange than any technology or custom she had seen. And slowly, carefully, she began to believe it might be true. Marcus started calling her Ellie because he said everyone deserved a real name. She held on to those 2 syllables like a lifeline, repeating them to herself in the quiet hours of the night. Ellie. 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 She was not a discard number anymore. She was Ellie, and she was beginning to remember what it felt like to be alive. 6 months passed aboard the Second Chance, and Ellie transformed in ways she never thought possible. Her broken legs healed strong and straight under Dr. Chun's careful attention. Her starved body filled out with proper nutrition and regular meals. But the greatest changes happened inside her mind and heart, where 15 years of darkness slowly gave way to light. Human crew accepted her as one of their own without question or hesitation. They taught her their language and their customs, and their strange and wonderful ways of seeing the universe. Sarah showed her how to read star charts and navigate through asteroid fields. Victor let her help in the engine room, explaining each system with patience and pride. Dr. Chun shared books and music and stories from 100 different human worlds, and Marcus taught her the most important lessons of all. He taught her how to look at herself in the mirror and see something worth loving. He taught her that mistakes were opportunities to learn, not crimes to be punished. He taught her that strength came not from hiding your weaknesses, but from admitting them and growing beyond them. The humans were loud and messy and emotional in ways that would have horrified the Valkyrie Council. They argued over small things and laughed over smaller things. They shared their food even when supplies ran low, dividing portions equally among the crew rather than by rank or usefulness. They told jokes that made no logical sense and cried at stories that were obviously fictional at first. Ellie found their behavior confusing and inefficient, but over time, she began to see the beauty in their chaos. These humans cared about each other, not because of duty or genetic programming, but because they chose to. Their bonds were forged through shared experiences and mutual respect, not mandated by law or bloodline. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. One morning, Ellie looked in the mirror and noticed something strange. Her bioluminescent markings, which had been dim and barely visible for years, were beginning to glow again. The flickering pattern that had condemned her as defective now pulsed with soft, silver light. She showed Dr. Chun, worried that something might be wrong with her biology. The doctor ran several tests and then smiled with understanding. Your markings are tied to your emotional state, she explained. When you were starving and suffering, they faded because you were dying inside. But now that you are healing, they are healing too. Ellie touched her own skin with wonder, watching the lights dance beneath her fingers among the Valkyrie. This flickering would still be seen as a flaw, a sign of genetic impurity, but here among the humans, they told her it was beautiful, like fireflies, Sarah said with a warm smile. Like stars being born, Victor added. Unusually poetic for the gruff engineer. Ellie had never felt beautiful before. She had never felt like anything but a mistake that should have been erased, but these humans saw her differently, and slowly she began to see herself through their eyes. The second chance continued its work across the outer systems. Salvaging wrecks and trading goods at distant stations, Ellie proved herself a valuable member of the crew. Quick to learn and eager to contribute, she discovered that she had a talent for negotiation, able to read other species and find common ground where others saw only conflict. Marcus often brought her along on business dealings. Proud of how far she had come, it was during one such stop at Meridian Station that everything changed. The station was a busy trading hub where a dozen different species came to buy and sell. Ellie had grown comfortable around most aliens, but she froze when she saw the delegation of Valkyrie diplomats crossing the main concourse. They were tall and elegant, with perfect steady markings that glowed like polished silver. They walked with the cold pride of their species, looking down on everyone around them as lesser beings. One of them noticed Ellie standing near a merchant stall. His eyes swept over her flickering markings with obvious disgust. A defective, he sneered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. How pathetic that one of our discards has survived this long. The humans must be truly desperate for company. Before Ellie could respond, Marcus stepped between them. He was shorter than the Valkyrie and older and completely unintimidating by any physical measure, but his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. You will apologize to her, he said. And it was not a request. The diplomat laughed with cruel amusement. Apologize? To genetic waste? You humans are even more foolish than the reports suggest. Marcus did not flinch. She is a member of my crew and my family, and you will treat her with respect or we will have a serious problem. The confrontation drew attention from Station security, and other bystanders. The Valkyrie diplomat clearly wanted to escalate, but causing an incident on neutral territory would create complications for his mission. He turned to leave with a dismissive gesture. But then something made him stop. His eyes had caught a mark on Ellie's shoulder, visible where her shirt had shifted during the confrontation. It was a scar she had carried since childhood, shaped like an intricate symbol that she had never understood. The diplomat's face went pale, and he grabbed her arm to look more closely. "Where did you get this mark?" he demanded, all arrogance suddenly replaced by something like fear. "I have always had it," Ellie said, confused by his reaction. "I do not know what it means." The diplomat released her like she had burned him and immediately began speaking into a communicator in rapid Valkyrie. Within minutes, a message was sent across the stars to the Dominion homeworld. Within hours, Ellie learned the truth that had been hidden from her for 15 years. The mark on her shoulder was the royal seal of House Version, burned into her skin at birth to identify her as a princess of the blood. The high matriarch, who had ordered her discarded, was dead, killed in a succession war that had torn the Dominion apart. 3 heirs had fought for the throne, and all 3 had destroyed each other in their pursuit of power. The genetic database had been searched for any surviving members of the royal line, and there was only one match: discard 1137. The girl they had thrown away like garbage was the last living heir to the throne of the Valkyrie Dominion, and now they wanted her back. The Valkyrie warships arrived 3 days later, emerging from hyperspace like silver predators surrounding their prey. There were 5 of them, each one larger and more powerful than anything the Second Chance could hope to match. They formed a perfect circle around the small salvage vessel and waited with the patient confidence of those who knew they had already won. Commander Vorath of the Dominion fleet broadcast his message across all channels, his voice cold and formal. "We have come for the Princess Elith Vorshan, last heir of the royal bloodline, rightful ruler of the Valkyrie Dominion. You will surrender her to us immediately, and you will be allowed to leave unharmed." The crew of the Second Chance gathered on the bridge, watching the massive warships through the view screen. Ellie stood among them with her heart pounding and her newly bright markings pulsing with stress. This was the moment she had secretly dreaded since learning the truth about her identity. The Valkyrie were not asking. They were demanding, and they had the power to take whatever they wanted. "What happens if I go with them?" Ellie asked quietly. "They will make you their puppet queen," Marcus answered honestly. "They will use your bloodline to legitimize their rule while stripping you of any real power. You will be a symbol and nothing more, trapped in a golden cage for the rest of your life." "And if I refuse?" Sarah checked the tactical display with grim determination. "Then they will probably take you anyway. We cannot fight 5 warships with 1 salvage hauler." Ellie closed her eyes and remembered everything the humans had taught her. She remembered that her worth was not determined by her genetics or her usefulness to others. She remembered that she had the right to choose her own path, to make her own decisions, to be the author of her own story. And she remembered that sometimes the right choice was not the safe choice. "I refuse," she said, opening her eyes with newfound resolve. "I will not go back to people who threw me away like garbage just because they suddenly find me convenient." Marcus smiled with fierce pride. "Then we fight." He opened a channel to Commander Vorath and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "The princess has declined your generous offer. She chooses to remain with her family aboard this vessel." The Valkyrie commander's response was immediate and incredulous. "Her family? You are humans. You share nothing with her. You are not even the same species." "Family is not about blood," Marcus replied. "Family is about choice. Family is about love. Family is about standing beside someone when the whole universe wants to tear them down." And Ellie is our family. He ended the transmission before the commander could respond. Standoff began. The Valkyrie ships held their position. Weapons powered but not yet firing. They had clearly expected the humans to surrender immediately. And this resistance had thrown them off balance. Taking the princess by force would be easy, but it would also be public. And the Dominion was not eager to broadcast images of their warships attacking a defenseless salvage vessel. But Marcus was not just waiting. He was broadcasting. His message went out across every frequency, spreading through the sector like wildfire. He told the story of a 3-year-old princess abandoned on a mining moon. He told the story of 15 years of suffering and survival. He told the story of how the Valkyrie discarded their own people like broken tools and then demanded them back when they became useful again. And he asked a simple question: would anyone stand with them? The first response came within hours. A human cargo freighter changed course and jumped into the system, taking position beside the second chance. Then another ship arrived, and another, and another. They were merchants and salvagers and explorers. Ordinary people with ordinary lives who had heard the story and decided to do something about it. By the end of the second day, over 30 human vessels had gathered around the second chance. None of them were warships. Most were barely armed at all together. They still could not match the firepower of the Valkyrie fleet, but they came anyway. Commander Vorith was baffled by this response. Why are they doing this? He demanded of his officers. They owe this girl nothing. Many of them have never even met her. What could they possibly gain from this foolish display? His tactical officer had no answer. The humans were behaving in ways that made no logical sense to the Valkyrie mind. They were risking their ships and their lives for a stranger simply because another human had asked for help. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It was everything the Valkyrie despised, and it was working. On the third day, Ellie requested permission to address the Dominion Council directly. The council agreed. Curious about what this defective princess might have to say, her face appeared on screens across Valkyrie space. Broadcast from the cramped bridge of a battered salvage ship. She did not beg for mercy. She did not plead for understanding. Instead, she asked a question. 15 years ago, you threw me away because my markings flickered instead of glowing steady. You decided I was worthless, defective, a stain on the royal bloodline that needed to be erased. Her markings pulsed with light as she spoke. The flicker that had condemned her now burning brighter than ever. But now you want me back because you're perfect. Heirs destroyed each other fighting for the throne. And suddenly my flawed genetics are the only option you have left. She let that truth hang in the silence for a moment. I want you to think about what that means. Your system of genetic perfection produced 3 heirs who were willing to burn the Dominion to the ground for their own ambition. And your discarded failure found people who taught her that every life has value simply because it exists. She gestured at the crew around her, at Marcus and Sarah and Victor and Dr. Chung. These humans saved me when my own people left me to die. They fed me and healed me and taught me how to be a person again. They asked for nothing in return except that I try to be better tomorrow than I was today. Her voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of 15 years of suffering and 6 months of healing. I will return to the Dominion. I will claim my throne, but I will do it on my terms. You will withdraw your weapons. You will accept human witnesses to my coronation, and you will acknowledge that the people who raised me have more honor than the empire that abandoned me. The council deliberated for 6 hours in the end. They agreed to every condition. They had no choice. The broadcast had spread too far, and the Dominion could not afford to look like villains in the eyes of the galactic community. The warships powered down their weapons and withdrew to a respectful distance. The princess had won. Without firing a single shot, and across the sector, humans raised their glasses in celebration of a girl who had refused to be discarded twice. The royal palace of the Valkyrie Dominion rose like a mountain of crystal and silver, its spires reaching toward the purple sky of the homeworld. Aleth Vershan had dreamed of this place during her darkest nights on Calyx 7. Though she had never truly believed she would see it now, she walked through its ancient halls with her human family at her side, and every Valkyrie noble they passed stared with barely concealed horror. She was not what they had expected. The council had imagined a grateful survivor, someone who would be thankful for rescue and eager to please. Instead, they got a woman who had been forged in suffering and tempered by human compassion. She walked with her head high and her flickering markings blazing like captured starlight. She did not bow to the nobles. She met their eyes with quiet confidence and let them look away. First, the coronation ceremony was broadcast across every world in the Dominion and beyond. Billions of Valkyrie watched as the ancient crown was brought forth, a circlet of living crystal that had been worn by 100 generations of rulers. The high priest spoke the traditional words, asking if any present would challenge the heir's right to rule. Silence filled the throne room. No one dared to speak against her. Not with the humans watching, not with the whole galaxy as witness. The crown was placed upon Elith's head, and in that moment something extraordinary happened. Her bioluminescent markings, which had always flickered with uncertain light, suddenly blazed brighter than any Valkyrie had ever seen. The flicker did not stop. Instead, it became something more, a pulse of living fire that rippled across her silver skin in waves of pure radiance. The nobles gasped and whispered among themselves, according to their ancient texts. The brightness of a ruler's markings reflected the strength of their spirit by that measure. Queen Aleth Vershan was the most powerful ruler in the history of the Dominion. The high priest dropped to his knees in reverence one by one. The council members followed, and there, in the heart of the empire that had thrown her away, Aleth finally understood the truth. Her flickering was never a flaw. It was something the Valkyrie had simply been too blind to understand. Her light was not weak. It was alive, changing and growing and adapting in ways that steady light could never match. The humans had taught her to see herself as worthy. Now the universe was proving them right. Her first act as queen was to address the Dominion from the throne room balcony. Millions of Valkyrie had gathered in the capital city to see their new ruler, uncertain what to expect from this legendary survivor. I was 3 years old when your laws condemned me to die, Aleth began, her voice amplified across the city. I spent 15 years on a mining moon, starving and suffering, believing that I was worthless because your system told me I was defective. The crowd listened in uneasy silence. But I did not die, and I did not stay broken, because I found people who believed something different. I found people who taught me that every life has value simply because it exists, not because of genetics or usefulness or any other measurement. She raised her hand, and behind her the crew of the Second Chance stepped forward, Marcus and Sarah and Victor and Dr. Chun. Ordinary humans who had changed the fate of an empire by choosing to care. These are the people who saved me. These are the people who will stand as witnesses to the changes I will make. And these are the people who will serve as ambassadors between our species. The crowd murmured with shock and confusion. A human ambassador to the Valkyrie? It was unheard of, unprecedented, impossible. But Queen Aleth was not finished. My first decree as your ruler is this: the discard protocol is abolished. Never again will a child be thrown away for failing to meet genetic standards. Never again will we measure the worth of a life by the steadiness of their markings or the purity of their bloodline. The murmuring grew louder. Some voices were angry, protesting this assault on their ancient traditions, but others, especially those who had hidden their own imperfect children or mourned relatives lost to the protocol, began to cheer. My second decree: we will open diplomatic relations with the Human Confederacy. We will learn from them as they have taught me. We will discover that compassion is not weakness, but strength. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had been raised to believe in genetic perfection above all else. I know this is frightening. I know that change is difficult, but I have seen both ways of living. I have experienced the coldness of our traditions and the warmth of human kindness. And I am telling you that we can be better than we have been. In the months that followed, Queen Aleph faced opposition from every direction. Conservative nobles plotted to remove her from power. Military commanders grumbled about the influence of human advisors. Religious leaders complained that she was destroying the foundations of Valkyrie culture. But for every enemy she made, she also made 100 allies. The common people adored their flickering queen. This survivor, who had risen from the refuse piles to claim the throne. The discarded and the defective came out of hiding, no longer afraid to show their imperfect markings. And the humans, those strange illogical beings who helped without expecting anything in return, became the most reliable partners the Dominion had ever known. Captain Marcus Cole was officially appointed as the first human ambassador to the Valkyrie, traded his salvage vessel for a diplomatic ship, though he kept the name Second Chance because he said it still fifth. Visited the palace often, sharing meals with the queen and advising her on matters of interspecies relations. One evening, they stood together on the balcony where she had given her first speech. The three moons were rising over the city, casting silver light across the crystal spires. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Regret what?" "All of this." He gestured at the palace around them, at the crown on her head, at the empire she now ruled. "You could have stayed with us on the ship, lived a simple life, been free." Aleph considered the question carefully before answering. "The humans taught me that every person has value," she said. "That includes the Volcari who threw me away. I do not forgive them, and I will never forget what they did to me. But I can try to make sure no one else suffers as I did." She turned to face the man who had become her father in every way that mattered. "Besides, you also taught me something else, something just as important." "What is that?" "That family is not about blood," she smiled, and her markings flickered with warmth. "It is about choice. And I choose to be here. I choose to make this empire better. And I choose to never forget where I came from." Marcus smiled back, his eyes bright with pride. "For what it is worth," he said, "I always knew you would be trouble." Queen Aleph laughed, a sound that echoed through the ancient halls like music and across the stars. In a galaxy that was slowly learning that compassion could conquer cruelty, the human way of thinking began to spread, not through war or conquest or force, but through the simple radical act of treating every person as if they mattered, because they did. They always had. Thanks to one discarded princess and the humans who saved her, the universe was finally beginning to understand.